Something just happened that almost nobody noticed, and it's going to reshape your financial future, whether you're ready or not. We're sitting on $38.43 trillion in national debt right now. That number alone should make you pause. But here's the part that should really get your attention. We're paying over $1.1 trillion every single year just in interest. Not building anything, not fixing anything, just interest payments on money we already spent. And the Federal Reserve just made their move. After hiking rates aggressively to fight inflation in 2022 and 2023, they've reversed course. 3 rate cuts in late 2024, bringing us down to 3.5% to 3.75%. They're claiming it's to support the labor market, but here's what they're really doing. They're choosing the path of least resistance. They're picking gradual currency erosion over immediate systemic failure. Because that's always the choice. Throughout all of human history, when governments get trapped by debt they can't possibly repay, they face the same decision. And they always, without exception, make the same choice. Let me show you the pattern. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once you understand it, you'll realize we're not in some unprecedented situation. We're following a script that's been performed hundreds of times before, always with the same ending. There's a cycle that plays out, every single time. 4 stages, as predictable as the seasons. Stage 1 starts with discipline, sound money, real backing. A currency people can trust because it represents something tangible, something that can't just be created at will. This is when empires rise, when economies thrive, when middle classes grow wealthy. But success breeds arrogance. Stage 2 arrives when confidence turns into complacency. Wars need funding. Social programs expand. Politicians make promises that sound great but cost more than anyone admits. Deficits become normalized. The central authority steps in as lender of last resort. Money creation accelerates, but everything still appears fine because economic growth masks the underlying rot. Then comes stage 3. The trap closes. The debt load becomes mathematically unsustainable. Interest payments devour tax revenues. The central authority faces an impossible choice: raise rates and crash everything immediately, or keep printing and slowly destroy the currency. They always choose to print. Always. Stage 4 is the endgame. Hyperinflation or outright default. The currency loses credibility completely. Savings evaporate. Social structures fracture. The system resets, usually through chaos, sometimes through conflict, always through the destruction of middle-class wealth. You think I'm being dramatic? Let me show you the receipts from history. Rome, the greatest empire the ancient world produced. At its peak, Roman power stretched from Britain to Egypt, an unprecedented achievement of military organization and economic integration. Their currency, the denarius, was trusted everywhere their legions marched. Stage 1 was solid. The denarius started at 95% pure silver. Real value, real trust. You could spend a coin minted in Rome anywhere in the empire and know it would hold the same purchasing power. But empires are expensive to maintain. Each emperor expanded the military, built monuments, funded public works. The Colosseum wasn't cheap. Neither were the legions guarding thousands of miles of frontier against hostile tribes. The cost of maintaining dominance exploded, so they started doing what desperate governments always do. They debased the currency. Nero kicked it off, reducing silver content to 90%, then 85%. Each successive emperor shaved a bit more. By the time you get to the 3rd century, the denarius was less than 5% silver. The rest? Bronze with a thin silver coating. It looked like silver. It passed as silver, but it wasn't silver. The consequences came fast. Prices spiraled completely out of control. A measure of wheat that cost 8 drachmas in the 2nd century cost 100 drachmas by the end of the 3rd century. A 150% increase. Citizens lost all faith in the money. Merchants refused to accept it. The government responded with price controls, which never work. When you make it illegal to charge market prices, sellers simply stop selling. Trade collapsed. People reverted to barter. Soldiers demanded payment in food and goods rather than worthless coins. The tax base imploded. And the Western Roman Empire? It didn't fall to barbarian invasions alone. The barbarians walked through a door that monetary collapse had already opened. When your currency is worthless, you can't pay soldiers. When you can't pay soldiers, you can't defend borders. When you can't defend borders, the empire fragments. 500 years of civilizational decline followed. The Dark Ages, all because they tried to print their way out of debt obligations. Fast forward to Weimar Germany in the 1920s. You've probably seen the famous photos. Wheelbarrows full of cash to buy a loaf of bread, children playing with stacks of million-mark notes like building blocks. But do you actually know why it happened? Before World War I, Germany ran a disciplined monetary system. The Reichsmark was backed by gold. The Bundesbank maintained strict standards. Germany was an industrial powerhouse with a thriving middle class and genuine economic stability. Then, the war changed everything. Germany borrowed heavily to fund the war effort, issuing war bonds and printing money, convinced that victory would cover all costs. But they lost. The Treaty of Versailles demanded 132 billion gold marks in reparations, an impossible sum. Germany's entire GDP was only 12 billion marks annually. The Weimar government did what desperate governments do. They printed. Slowly at first, then faster, then exponentially. They needed to pay reparations. They needed to fund pensions for war widows. They needed to rebuild infrastructure. They needed to keep the population from revolting. The printing presses ran non-stop. In 1921, $1 bought 75 marks. By November 1923, $1 bought 4.2 trillion marks. Trillion. In less than 3 years, the currency lost essentially all value. Prices doubled every few days, then every few hours. Workers were paid twice daily because money lost value faster than they could spend it. Life savings became worthless overnight. Imagine working your entire life, saving diligently, building a retirement fund of 100,000 marks, enough to retire comfortably, then watching it become worth less than a single loaf of bread. Pensions vanished. Insurance policies became jokes. Bonds became worthless paper. The middle class was completely annihilated. But the wealthy? They survived because they held real assets. Land, factories, foreign currency, gold. Inflation destroys cash. It doesn't destroy assets. The wealth gap exploded. The social consequences were catastrophic. The population was desperate, angry, humiliated, hungry. They looked for someone to blame, someone who promised simple solutions. We all know what came next. The economic devastation created the conditions for extremism. Monetary collapse doesn't just hurt bank accounts. It tears apart the social fabric itself. Now let me give you an example that happened in our lifetime. While most people were distracted by entertainment and social media, Venezuela went through the entire cycle. 20 years ago, Venezuela was the richest country in South America. Not one of the richest, the richest. Massive oil reserves, strong middle class, modern infrastructure. Caracas was a thriving city with shopping malls, universities, quality healthcare, a stable currency. Then socialist policies expanded rapidly. Price controls, nationalization of industries, government spending explosion. Free housing, free healthcare, free education, subsidized everything, all funded by oil revenues. And for a while, it actually worked. Oil prices were high, money flooded in, the government could afford its promises. But economies don't run on promises. They run on production. When you nationalize industries, impose price controls, punish success and reward dependency, production collapses. Venezuelan oil production peaked at 3.5 million barrels daily in 1998. By 2020, it had crashed to 300,000, a 90% collapse. When oil prices crashed in 2014, the entire facade collapsed with them. The government was trapped. It had made promises it couldn't keep. Social spending commitments, debt payments, public sector salaries. But revenues were gone, so they printed bolivars, massive quantities, exponential quantities. Inflation hit 300% in 2017, then 1,000,000% by 2018. Prices doubled every 18 days. Grocery stores emptied, not because there was no food, but because price controls made it illegal to charge what food actually cost. Why would farmers farm at a guaranteed loss? Why would truckers transport goods for worthless currency? Why would store owners stock shelves? Medicine disappeared. Hospitals ran out of basic supplies. People lost an average of 24 pounds, not from dieting, but from actual malnutrition and hunger, in one of the most resource-rich countries on Earth in the 21st century. Over 7 million people fled the country. 7 million out of 30 million total population. They walked across borders with whatever they could carry. Families separated, careers abandoned, lives destroyed. A once prosperous nation reduced to a humanitarian crisis in less than a decade. And here's the detail that should terrify you most. Venezuela has more proven oil reserves than Saudi Arabia, more than Iraq, more than any country except possibly Canada. This wasn't a resource problem or bad luck or a natural disaster. This was a monetary problem, a currency problem, a government spending problem. They printed their way into poverty. 3 examples. 3 different centuries, 3 different continents, same pattern, same stages, same outcome. Now let me show you why the United States is following the exact same script. The US used to have Stage 1 discipline. The Bretton Woods system established the dollar as the global reserve currency in 1944. Every other currency was pegged to the dollar. The dollar was pegged to gold at $35 per ounce. Foreign nations could exchange dollars for physical gold. This created real accountability. Real limits. The Fed couldn't just print unlimited dollars because France or Germany or Japan could show up with dollars and demand gold. That was sound money, disciplined money, and it made America the most prosperous nation on earth. The 1950s and 60s saw unprecedented growth, rising wages, expanding middle class. The American dream was real because the American currency was real. But here's what they don't teach in schools. That system ended in 1971. August 15th. President Nixon closed the gold window unilaterally. He went on television and announced that the United States would no longer convert dollars to gold. Why? Because we didn't have enough gold. We'd printed too many dollars funding the Vietnam War and Great Society programs. We'd overspent, and France knew it. Charles de Gaulle started demanding gold for dollars. Other nations followed. Nixon knew if he didn't close the window, Fort Knox would be empty within months, so he closed it. No more gold backing, no more convertibility. The dollar became a pure fiat currency, backed by nothing but government promise. That was the end of Stage 1. We've been in Stage 2 ever since, for 53 years. After 1971, U.S. debt exploded. In 1971, total federal debt was $398 billion. Today, it's $38.43 trillion. That's an 8,700% increase, and that's just federal debt. Add state debt, municipal debt, corporate debt, household debt, you're looking at well over $100 trillion in total obligations. But the real acceleration happened after 2008. The financial crisis should have been a reset. Banks made reckless loans, packaged garbage mortgages into AAA-rated securities, leveraged themselves 40 to 1 or 50 to 1. When housing prices stopped rising, the whole structure collapsed. Lehman Brothers failed. Bear Stearns failed. AIG was hours from failure. That moment was a choice. Let the system fail. Let bad debt get liquidated. Let reckless institutions go bankrupt. Let housing prices fall to natural levels. Severe pain, yes, maybe even a depression. But a clean reset, a healthy correction. That's how capitalism is supposed to function. Failure is part of the system, but that's not what happened. Instead, the Federal Reserve intervened with unprecedented money creation. They called it quantitative easing. Sounds technical, sophisticated, like something only PhD economists can understand. But it's not complicated. It's just printing money. The Fed created dollars from nothing and used them to buy government bonds and mortgage-backed securities. QE1, $1.7 trillion. QE2, $600 billion. QE3, another $1.7 trillion. The Fed's balance sheet went from $800 billion in 2008 to $4.5 trillion by 2015. They quintupled the money supply. And where did that money go? To workers? To wage increases? To the middle class? No. It inflated asset prices. Stocks went up. Bonds went up. Real estate went up. If you owned assets, you got richer. If you didn't, you fell further behind. The wealth gap exploded. But at least consumer price inflation stayed relatively low, right? So the Fed kept expanding, kept printing, kept assuring everyone everything was fine. Then COVID hit, and they went absolutely nuclear. March 2020, economy shut down, businesses closed, unemployment spiked to 15% almost overnight, markets crashed. And the Fed responded with the largest money-printing operation in human history. $3 trillion in 3 months. That's more than they printed in the entire decade after 2008. The Fed's balance sheet exploded from $4 trillion to $9 trillion. Congress added fuel with stimulus checks, expanded unemployment benefits, PPP loans, infrastructure bills. Total COVID spending exceeded $6 trillion. And initially, inflation didn't spike. People thought we'd gotten away with it. They thought modern monetary theory was vindicated. But there's always a delay. The money sat in bank reserves and asset markets first. Stocks went vertical while millions were unemployed. Real estate jumped 20%, 30%, 40% in single years. Billionaires added $3.9 trillion to their wealth during the pandemic, while small businesses closed by the hundreds of thousands. Then inflation hit the real economy. By mid-2022, consumer price inflation peaked at 9.1%, highest in 40 years. Gas prices doubled, grocery bills jumped 30% to 50%, rent skyrocketed, your paycheck bought less every single month. Jerome Powell, who spent 2 years claiming inflation was transitory, suddenly changed his tune. So they raised rates aggressively. From near 0 to 5.3% in less than 18 months, the fastest tightening since the 1980s. And you know what that did? It made the debt unsustainable, which is exactly where we are right now. Stage 3. The United States government pays over $1.1 trillion per year just in interest. Not schools, not roads, not defense, just interest, the cost of past borrowing. That's roughly 13% of the entire federal budget gone. And that's with rates at around 3.6% average. Here's the math that should terrify you. If interest rates normalize to 7%, still below the historical average, interest payments will exceed $2 trillion annually. More than Social Security, more than Medicare, more than defense, just interest. And we're not paying down the debt. We're not even slowing its growth. We're adding roughly $2 trillion in new debt every single year. The deficit keeps growing because the entire economy is now dependent on deficit spending. Cut spending significantly and the economy crashes immediately. Millions lose jobs. Retirees don't get checks. Chaos follows. So the Fed faced an impossible choice. Keep rates high and let the government drown in interest payments. Let banks collapse under underwater bond portfolios like we saw with Silicon Valley Bank. Let the housing market crash with 7% mortgages making homes unaffordable. Let the stock market crash, destroying retirement accounts for 70% of Americans. Or cut rates, restart easier policy, choose gradual currency destruction over immediate system failure. They chose the second option. They always choose the second option. September through December 2024, 3 rate cuts, back down to 3.5%, 3.75%. They're easing again, back to choosing inflation over honesty. And in December 2025, they ended quantitative tightening and announced they're starting to buy Treasury bills again, $40 billion monthly. But here's what's different this time. The world is watching, and the world is responding. China has been reducing U.S. Treasury holdings for years. They're down to $757 billion from over $1 trillion. Japan, the largest foreign holder, is tightening its own monetary policy and can't keep absorbing our debt like before. Saudi Arabia, which has recycled petrodollars into U.S. treasuries since the 1970s, is now accepting yuan for oil. The petrodollar system is fracturing in real time. BRICS nations are building alternative payment systems, settling trade in local currencies, reducing dollar reserves, buying gold at record levels. Central banks worldwide purchased over 1,000 metric tons of gold in both 2022 and 2023. Why? Because they see what's coming. The privilege of being the global reserve currency is eroding, and when that privilege is gone, when foreign nations stop buying our debt, the Fed will have only one buyer left, itself. That's the textbook definition of monetizing debt. That's the pathway to hyperinflation. We're in stage 3 by design. Every decision, every policy, Every rate cut is pushing us toward the inevitable conclusion. The math doesn't lie. The debt cannot be paid. The interest cannot be sustained. The currency cannot maintain value indefinitely. Something has to give. And that something is your purchasing power, your savings, your future. Stage 4 is what comes next. There are only two possible outcomes: hyperinflation or default. Hyperinflation means the Fed keeps printing, keeps monetizing debt, keeps cutting rates even as inflation resurges. They'll call it something else. They'll blame external factors, supply chains, geopolitics, corporate greed, anything except the real cause. But the result is identical. Prices spiral. 10% becomes 20. 20 becomes 50. Your salary and savings get destroyed not by confiscation, but by devaluation. Default means the government admits it can't pay. Bond markets collapse instantly. Interest rates spike to 20%, 30%, maybe 40% overnight. Credit freezes completely. Banks fail en masse. The FDIC doesn't have remotely enough to cover deposits. They insure about $9 trillion in deposits with only $100 billion in reserves. Social security checks stop. Government services stop. When the money stops, everything stops. Which will they choose? History gives the answer. Governments always choose hyperinflation over default. 100% of the time, because default is immediate political termination. You admit failure publicly, you face immediate consequences. Hyperinflation lets you pretend it's not your fault. You can blame corporations. You can blame foreign adversaries. You can implement price controls and pretend you're helping. But here's the truth. Both outcomes destroy the middle class. Both concentrate wealth at the top. In hyperinflation, asset holders win. People with real estate, stocks, gold, commodities see nominal wealth increase. People with cash savings get destroyed. Both outcomes lead to social instability. Hungry people riot. Desperate people embrace extremism. I can hear the objections forming. This time is different. That's what they always say. It's never different. The details change. The technology changes. The names change. The pattern doesn't. The dollar is the reserve currency. The world needs dollars. For now. That status isn't permanent. It's a privilege granted by the rest of the world, and that privilege is eroding. The dollar accounted for 70% of global reserves in 2000. Today, it's below 60% and falling. America is too powerful, too innovative. Venezuela had the most oil. Rome had the most advanced military. Power doesn't protect you from monetary collapse. It makes the fall worse because you have further to fall. They won't let it collapse. The Fed has tools. Who's they? The same people who said inflation was transitory? The same people who said subprime mortgages were contained? They don't control this anymore. The debt controls it. The math controls it. Every excuse is denial wrapped in wishful thinking. So what do you actually do? How do you prepare? First, understand this isn't about predicting the exact collapse date. Nobody can do that. It might take 2 years. It might take 10. But the direction is clear. The outcome is inevitable. Position yourself accordingly. Second, protect your wealth. Move assets out of pure dollar-denominated holdings. You need dollars for daily transactions, for emergencies. But don't hold all wealth in dollars. Diversify into hard assets, real estate in areas with strong fundamentals, productive land, rental properties with real utility. Physical property can't be printed. Commodities, gold, silver, industrial metals. These are real things with real demand. When currency loses value, commodities hold value. Gold has been money for 5,000 years. Every fiat currency in history has eventually failed. Gold hasn't. Equity in productive businesses with pricing power. Companies that can raise prices as inflation rises. Not speculation. Real businesses with real cash flow, foreign assets, diversify geographically, Swiss francs, Norwegian krone, Singapore dollars, currencies backed by more responsible fiscal policy. Third, increase your skills and flexibility. In chaotic times, adaptability equals survival. The ability to generate income multiple ways, the ability to work remotely, the ability to relocate if necessary. Skills are inflation-proof. Nobody can devalue your knowledge. Learn practical skills. How to fix things, grow food, repair, build. When systems break down, Practical skills become more valuable than credentials. Fourth, build community and networks. When systems fail, people survive through cooperation, relationships, trust. Invest in those connections now. Family, friends, neighbors. These networks become critical when institutions fail. Fifth, stay informed. Don't trust mainstream narratives designed to keep you calm and spending. Seek independent analysis from people who've been right before. Knowledge is power. And sixth, take action now. Not later. Now. Stage 4 doesn't announce itself. It happens fast, exponentially fast. Venezuela went from prosperous to collapsed in under 5 years. Weimar went from stable to hyperinflation in 2 years. When stage 4 starts, it accelerates. Every day things get worse faster. Every week the options narrow. The window for preparation is still open, but it won't stay open forever. Act while you can, while assets can still be moved, while options still exist. The Federal Reserve made their choice. They chose to print. They chose inflation. They chose to gradually destroy the currency rather than face immediate consequences. Now you have to make your choice. You can deny it. You can hope it goes away. You can trust the people who've been wrong about everything. You can do nothing and hope for the best. Or you can prepare. You can act. You can protect yourself and your family. The pattern is clear throughout history. The outcome is inevitable. Don't be the person who saw it coming and did nothing. Don't be the person who understood but failed to act. Because when stage 4 hits, there are no second chances. There's just before and after. And after is too late. If understanding this pattern changes how you see the financial system, if you want to stay ahead instead of getting caught in the collapse, then subscribe to Next Generation Finance right now and turn on notifications. Because what we just covered, that's only the beginning. The moves happening right now in monetary policy are setting up the biggest wealth transfer in modern history, and you need to know which side you're going to be on. Drop a comment and tell me, are you repositioning your wealth, or are you riding this out? Let's figure out the path forward together before the window closes. This is not financial advice. Always do your own research and consult with qualified professionals before making investment decisions.